Greetings from the PEP Radio studios. This is a PEP Radio special report, government shutdowns, past and present. From the PEP Radio newsroom, we have this special report about the current and previous federal government shutdowns. With government shutdowns in the news increasingly often, it seems like they're pretty common. In fact, the government of the United States has only shut down a handful of times, and all of those took place after 1981, with a few exceptions back in the 70s. A government shutdown in the U.S. happens when the American president and Congress reach an impasse about funding. Technically, this definition didn't come to fruition until 1980 and 1981, when Attorney General of the United States, Benjamin Civiletti, essentially decided that the federal government couldn't operate legally when a funding gap existed. Prior to this, the U.S. federal government had kept operating despite gaps in funding, although to some scholars the first government shutdown is considered to have taken place under Gerald Ford. That said, it wasn't until the Reagan administration that the U.S. federal government really shut down when faced with a funding gap. So government shutdowns since the early 1980s have varied in length, extent to which service is halted, and contention between political parties and branches of government. Employees are furloughed, offices closed, and payments are stopped to government workers deemed essential enough to remain on duty. In more modern times, they also impact things like SNAP benefits or food stamps, and they have an impact on transportation. Transportation safety workers and air traffic controllers aren't getting paid, and many of them, as a result, have been calling in sick. So here then, in chronological order, are the number of shutdowns for each president from Gerald Ford all the way up to Donald Trump, and the extent of each shutdown. Gerald Ford had one shutdown. This happened in September of 1976. Gerald Ford, the Republican, was in the White House, and Democrats controlled the House of Representatives in the United States Senate. Were any agencies and departments affected? No. President Gerald Ford vetoed a $56 million appropriation bill that would have funded governmental programs to support health, labor, education, and welfare. He accused Congress of having a partisan political purpose. Again, Democrats controlled the House and the Senate, and Gerald Ford, the Republican, controlled the White House. Congress overrode his veto and funded parts of the government on October 1st, 1976. As of October 11th, Congress passed joint resolutions sufficient to fund the 1977 fiscal year. During the Carter administration, the government shut down 5 times. So when did this happen? Well, for fiscal year 1977, so from September 30th, 1976 to October 11th, 1976, the government was shut down for 10 days. In September 30th, 1977 to October 13th of 77, the government was shut down for a total of 12 days. It happened again on the 31st until the 9th of November. Government was shut down for 8 additional days. Happened again November 30th of 77 till December 9th. Another 8 days. By fiscal year 1979, the government shut down from November 30th of 78 until October of 78 for 17 more days, and again from September 30th of 79 until October 12th of 79 for an 11 more days. So a quick check of the math, let's see, that's 38, 55, total of 56 days. But one of those days was for the Federal Trade Commission. So Jimmy Carter was a Democrat, and Democrats at the time controlled both houses of Congress, both the Senate and the House. No agencies or departments were impacted by the first 4 funding gaps during the Carter administration. The funding gaps involved issues related to Medicaid and abortion and government funding for defense spending and public works. The Carter administration is notable because after the decision by Attorney General Benjamin Civiletti, the Federal Trade Commission became the first federal agency to shutter its doors in 1980. President Jimmy Carter was notified via letter by Civiletti that the Anti-Deficiency Act of 1870 prohibited federal agencies from creating debt after its authority to expend money lapsed. So the Federal Trade Commission closed for one day, May 1st of 1980. That was it. No other departments were impacted, and food stamp benefits weren't cut. Medicaid continued to work as usual, and all government employees, federal government employees, were still getting paid. Things changed by the Reagan administration. During the Reagan administration, the government shut down 8 times. There were 8 different funding gaps, but only 13 days total were lost. There were only furloughs for 2 days, so government employees missed 2 days of work, unlike the current situation we're in now. President Reagan was a Republican, and during the entirety of the Reagan administration, Democrats controlled the U.S. House of Representatives. Between 1981 and 1987, Republicans controlled the Senate, but with the election back in 86, so beginning in 1987 through 1989, Democrats had the majority in both the House and the Senate. The shutdown in 1981 resulted in a full government shutdown, except for the legislative branch. Roughly 241,000 employees were furloughed. For less than 1 day in 1984, 500,000 non-essential employees were furloughed in October, and in 1986, a comparable number was sent home for part of a day. 1 day. And not even the entire day, just part of it. Kind of like they got a permission to leave work early for the day. That was it. The funding disputes were between congressional houses and the executive branch, and they involved defense spending, education, and public works. So these were very brief, very easily fixed issues that the Reagan team worked together with Congress to get continuing resolutions and other legislation passed to keep the government funded and to keep federal employees working. And during this time, nobody lost their food stamp benefits, nobody lost their Medicaid benefits, nobody lost their housing benefits. That all was maintained. During the term of George H.W. Bush, one time, from October 5th of 1990 through October 9th of 90, so a total of 3 days for fiscal year 1991. President George H.W. Bush was a Republican. Both the House and the Senate were controlled by Democrats for the entirety of Bush's term in office. There was a full government shutdown except for essential workers, and the shutdown under the Bush administration occurred after President Bush sent his $1.2 trillion budget. Notice we went from the millions of dollars in funding, $56 million during the Ford administration back in the 70s, in 76, to the Bush administration. Now we're talking about trillions of dollars not being appropriated by Congress. The resulting $64.7 billion deficit was contested by the Congressional Budget Office, which estimated it was actually higher, somewhere around $131 billion. And during the negotiations, Bush vetoed legislation that would have kept the government running in lieu of a shutdown. So Bush deliberately did not sign the continuing resolution to keep the government open. Further discussion resulted in a budget that prevented severe cuts to Medicare and compromised on tax rates moving forward. Bush and Congress were able to come to a compromise. They were able to work together, and they took into account the things that the Democrats were saying, things that the Republicans wanted. And while we may not have agreed at the time that the budgets that were passed were effective or good, we're still talking about relatively small budget deficits. Yes, $64.7 billion or $131 billion, that's a lot of money. But today, that's not very much at all. We'll see those numbers in just a moment. During the Clinton administration, 2 times, Government shut down 2 times for fiscal year 1996, and those shutdowns took place November 13th, 1995 to November 19th, 95, so for 5 days. And then again from December 15th through January of 1996, the government was shut down for 21 days. Bill Clinton was a Democrat, still is a Democrat. Between 1993 and 1995, Democrats controlled both the House and the Senate, and after 1995, Republicans had majorities in both houses of Congress. So during the Clinton administration, power shifted in the Congress from Democrats to Republicans. During the first partial shutdown of the Clinton administration, the Treasury Department, the Postal Service, the Legislative Branch, the District of Columbia, the Departments of Defense, Commerce, Justice, State, Interior, Labor, Health and Human Services, Education, Veterans Affairs, Housing and Urban Development, Foreign Operations. Those were all impacted. That's quite a bit. During the second shutdown, they involved the Departments of Commerce, Justice, State, Interior, Labor, Health and Human Services, Education, Veterans Affairs, and so forth. So most of the federal government. And in total, about 800,000 employees were impacted during the first shutdown and roughly 280,000 during the second shutdown. But again, these were within the tail end of one calendar year going into the start of the next year, from November 13th, 1995 till early January of 1996, for a total of 26 days. That was it. President Clinton vetoed a resolution to continue funding because he objected to Medicare premium increases, which is precisely what Democrats are complaining about now. Just not Medicare. Their concern is about Medicaid. So again, under the Clinton administration, shutdowns lasted 26 days. 21 days was the longest in U.S. history at the time. And it left a black mark on the Clinton administration. What about George W. Bush? It didn't shut down. During the 8 years of the Bush presidency, the government never shut down. Congress was able to come up with continuing resolutions to solve budgetary crises. However, there is one significant event that did shut down parts of the government, but it wasn't a budgetary crisis, and it wasn't rooted in Congress. You see, although Congress and President George W. Bush did not reach a budgetary crisis that led to a government shutdown, the September 11, 2001 attack on the Pentagon, the World Trade Center, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania did, however, cause many businesses. It caused the United Nations, the national monuments and memorials, and other institutions to close for emergency precautionary reasons. Schools shut down for a day or so, a couple of days. The entire airspaces of the United States and Canada were closed. They were put on a full ground stop. All flights in and out of the United States and Canada were stopped by order of FAA National Operations Manager Ben Sliney, who was working his very first day in that position. The only flights that were allowed to take off were military, police, and medical flights to make sure people could get to and from the hospital, the military to make sure that American airspace was protected, the police who were conducting law enforcement investigations. So 0 times for George W. Bush. You know, despite all of the bungling and clumsy mistakes he made with the war in Iraq, and with all of the mistakes he made with education, at least to his credit, the government never shut down during his administration. What about his follower, his successor, Barack Obama? Once. From September 30th, 2013 to October 17th, 2013, so for a total of 16 days, this was fiscal year 2014, it had just started, the government shut down. Barack Obama was a Democrat, still is a Democrat. Democrats controlled both houses of Congress for the first 2 years of the Obama presidency, but then Republicans took control of the House of Representatives from 2013 and 2017 and held majorities in both houses from 2015 to 2017. The entire government shut down for 16 days during the Obama presidency. This included furloughs for about 800,000 workers, with delayed payments to essential employees still on duty from the U.S. military, alongside air traffic controllers, Homeland Security, the U.S. Postal Service, and Veterans Services. So in other words, the laid off employees got paid eventually. Unlike President Trump's threats that laid off employees who are in the current shutdown will not be getting paid at all, potentially. The government shutdown. Why did this happen during the Obama administration? Well, the government shutdown involved funding disagreements related to the Patient and Protection Act and the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. The House of Representatives, led by Speaker of the House John Boehner, was a move by Republicans to hang threats of a government shutdown or economic chaos over the heads of the American people. The Republicans fueled that particular shutdown. And the shutdown came to an end after negotiations between bipartisan leaders funded the Affordable Care Act and approved an increase to the debt ceiling. So we got the continuing resolution. We got a budget, and the government was able to continue to function. And again, this only lasted 16 days. What about the Biden administration? We're going to come back to Trump in a minute. But what about the Biden administration? Zero times. With a government shutdown narrowly avoided a late Friday night into an early Saturday morning back in 2021, the House and Senate sent a funding bill to President Joe Biden's desk. An initial bipartisan deal was tanked earlier that particular week by President-elect Donald Trump. I'm sorry, this happened in 2024 going into 2025. President-elect Donald Trump and his ally Elon Musk tanked a bipartisan deal that the Congress had reached to get a budget passed. On Thursday night of that week, the House failed to pass a revamped plan that included Trump's explosive demand that the debt limit be extended. Joe Biden said no. Under the final proposal, the 118-page bill contained most of the provisions that were put in place in the bipartisan bill that was agreed to eventually. The bill included $100 billion for disaster aid, $30 billion for farmers, and a one-year extension of the Farm Bill, provisions that were under heavy debate prior to that particular week's votes. Once again, under the Biden administration, there were no government shutdowns. It never happened. Under Donald Trump, there have been 4 government shutdowns. Funding gaps that ran for 3 days, from January 19th of 2018 to January 22nd of 2018. That was 3 days. For a few hours on February 9th of 2018, there was a brief government shutdown. From December 21st, 2018 to January 25th of 2019, so for a total of 34 days, the government shut down, again, over budget issues. And now, as of October 1st of this year, still going on today at the time we're recording this special report, the government is currently shut down. That adds problems to folks who are in Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania's budget impasse is also ongoing. State government funding that should have passed both chambers of the Pennsylvania legislature back on July 1st of 2025, those have stalled because the House in Pennsylvania passed a budget 3 times, the budget from Governor Shapiro, and the Pennsylvania Senate has stalled that legislation. So, as we all know, President Trump is a Republican. And who controls Congress? Well, Republicans control the Senate, or the entirety of Donald Trump, for the entirety of Donald Trump's first presidential term. The Democrats controlled the House of Representatives from 2019 to 2021, with Republicans holding the majority for the 2 years prior, so from 2017 to 2019. Currently, Republicans have secured control of both houses of Congress from 2025 to 2027, and it should be noted that 6 of the 9 appointees to the U.S. Supreme Court were appointed by Republicans and are conservative and have consistently voted with conservative objectives in mind. What's happening during the current shutdown? President Trump, he's not curtailing his travel. He's not avoiding golf or making do with a skeleton staff in the West Wing. Even hamburgers served at the White House aren't from McDonald's this time. They're from Wendy's. In shutdowns past, including Trump's first term, presidents normally scaled back their schedules with staffers deemed non-essential. They were sent home. The White House often seemed to appear, at least superficially, sympathetic to Americans affected by disruptions to healthcare, veterans benefits, and other key services, such as SNAP benefits. Folks, we're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we'll talk more about what steps, if any, President Trump is taking to end the government shutdown. We'll be right back